Okay, everybody, so today you've got a special treat to hear from the team that created the Jersey Boys, and I want to just start by introducing somebody I've known for a long time, one of the great figures in the modern history of Broadway, Ed Strong from Dodger Productions. He and I have known each other since I was in college and was in a show that he had produced on Broadway when it was done here in North Carolina. And Ed's going to take it from here, and so let's give a warm welcome to Ed Strong.
Thank you, Holden and Buck. It's a genuine pleasure for me to be back down here in Chapel Hill talking about Jersey Boys as an example of entrepreneurship. And in the best tradition of show business, it's a kick to play the big room. I'm particularly pleased that my Jersey Boys creative colleagues, Bob Gaudio and Rick Elice, answered my call for backup when I realized that my own marquee value needed a little embellishment. Thank you, gentlemen. Bob Gaudio, one of the original Four Seasons and composer of almost all their famous songs, is a pop music icon and member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the Songwriters Hall of Fame. Bob may also be one of the only people in America who received the blessing of his high school principal to convince his parents to let him drop out of school at the age of 15 so he could go on the road with Chuck Berry and the Everly Brothers to support his own hit single, Who Wears Short Shorts? Amid the many highlights of the Jersey Boys ride, the Tony Award, the Olivier Award in London, the Helpman Award in Australia, the Grammy Award, among these highlights sits February 3rd, 2009, when Bob, more than 50 years after the fact, received his honorary diploma from Bergenfield High School. Rick Elice, my contemporary at the Yale School of Drama, is a Tony Award nominee for both Jersey Boys and last season's Peter and the Starcatcher. An actor and former creative director of the leading Broadway advertising agency, Rick saw his first Broadway show when he was 3. His mother said he was very well behaved. From that auspicious beginning, he dreamed of working in the theater, and from the age of 19, he has. Jersey Boys is one of his first attempts at writing for the theater. And to double down on his daring, he enlisted a poker game buddy, Marshall Brickman, of film and television fame, but new to the theater, as his co-author. We use as our starting point this afternoon the literal French meaning of entrepreneur, one who takes action, and mindful that that imperative launches a journey without one's knowing the exact destination, or even worse, in the case of the commercial theater world, defying the gravity of a failure rate of about 80%. I propose that Jersey Boys represents 3 separate entrepreneurial initiatives from those of us on stage that coalesce eventually into Broadway's Tony Award-winning Best Musical of 2006. The composer, the writer, and the producer each take actions, and then the elusive, frustrating, maddening, but ultimately vital ingredient of collaboration lifts the boat. What I'd like to do now is show a short promotional DVD, what we call the ooh-ah video, and then return to ask my colleagues for their perspectives on the innovative paths they took to make Jersey Boys the extraordinary event, to date, the 18th longest running show in Broadway history, that it has become since its opening in November 2005. So Leah, we can move over here and watch.
Cool. This is a taste of reality about 4 guys that grew up in a certain way, in a certain period of time, who, with all odds against them, became successful.
You're listening to me, Barry Belson, WCFA Radio. We're in our 17th hour, locked inside the studio, and yes, we're still playing the same song. Oh, what the hey? I think I'll play it again. Here it comes, all you submarine watchers. Put down that girl and let it into the 4 seasons. Sherry, Sherry, baby, Sherry, Sherry, baby, Sherry.
It's called The Jersey Boys, and it's like a runaway blockbuster hit. Paul has seen it and loved it.
I have seen it twice, and I'm going back for my 33rd
good time.
I can't say enough about this show.
Yeah.
Who had the option on the Four Seasons catalog had come to him and wanted to do Mamma Mia. And we looked at each other and we said, well, but that's been done. And then we went to lunch with Frankie Valli and Bob Gaudio, the two guys, the remaining operative seasons.
I knew all about all the groups that I cared about as a kid. I didn't know anything about these guys. I just knew the songs. And they said we were never written about, which is why you've never heard about it. Why weren't you written about? Well, there was, who cared about us? We were these blue-collar dropouts. We got, we'd get arrested as soon as we'd walk off stage. We were mixed up with the mob.
Sounds interesting to me.
And that was exactly our reaction. Wait a minute, guys. This is the story you want to tell.
So, who started the group? Who got the bookings? Without me, it'll be in the trunk of somebody's car with a bullet in your head.
Yeah, from your friends.
You know what'd be nice since I was here before any of you? A little respect!
For what? Getting 162 in the hole?
Like you think it's easy running a... Hey, sit down!
Let me handle this. It's a few $100 grand. We got something going here. It took a lot of work and a lot of years.
So?
So the group takes the debt.
This is his problem. Why do we take his debt?
Because we're not gonna let it come apart.
And the 2006 Tony Award for Best Musical goes to Jersey Boys.
They're in London, they're in Las Vegas, there's a tour, they're in Chicago, and then there's Australia.
He's seen it. Everyone I've seen has seen it.
This morning.
Yeah,
Karen, I'm sorry.
Raving about it.
I'm not just saying it is a great show.
Greatest musical on Broadway. It's called Jersey Boy.
Jersey Boy.
Jersey Boy. Jersey Boy.
Jersey Boys for 400.
The Jersey Boys.
Good, but I had no idea that it would reach so many people in so many different ways.
How great is Jersey Boys?
It's not great. It's fantastic. You totally undersold it. The pageantry, the costumes, wow, what a musical.
A friend of mine came to see the show and he said, I think this show is going to be bigger than you guys were. So I said, wow, terrific.
This is my 4th time, and hopefully I'll get to see it another 30 times.
I've come to learn that if it's good, see it again. It's like catching lightning in a bottle.
Who loves you, pretty baby?
No, you gotta do it up here, like him.
Yeah, right. Because I can totally do that.
It's fabulous. I'm having a great time. It's hard not to get up and dance in the aisles or sing along.
It's involving, it's emotional, and it's the best evening I've ever spent in the theater, ever.
When I walk into this theater, I'm a 60-year-old grandmother, and when I leave, I'm 16 years old.
These kids are so incredibly talented, I don't even know where to start. I mean, they blow me away.
What's the point? What's the point of continuing? Never get tired of watching that. So there you have a glimpse of the powerful finished product, but I can assure you that before Jersey Boys became a Jeopardy category, there were 1,000 small steps on the long journey to make it the phenomenon that it's become. The Jersey Boys' entrepreneurial history really begins with the idea. And Bob, since you were there first, as the composer of the songs, when did you first think about their dramatic potential presented in a theatrical format?
Well, I'd like to say when I wrote Sherry, you know, it's a score that had 40 years to be done. So that, of course, is not true. But the first moment, I think, that gave me some glimpse of our music could be played in another medium was watching The Deer Hunter. There's a scene in The Deer Hunter, which is one of my favorite movies of all time, in the pool hall where the guys being shipped out, and they have their last night before they go, and it's used so effectively in there, and it's the first time I'd seen any of our music put on screen. So that was the beginning. That was the first time I think hey, besides radio, there's another place for us, or they could be. Of course, that was a long journey.
And how did you find your way to Rick and Marshall?
Let's see. We had another producer that we were working around for 3 years, 3 lost years, and Rick, I think you came through that avenue, and then we hooked up in California, and you told us that you were very interested, and then I'm not sure if Marshall Brickman was involved then, but we spoke for a couple of hours, and we felt good about Rick. We thought, yeah, you know, maybe this is the light at the end of the tunnel, and it went from there, and doesn't he look like the light at the end of the tunnel?
You know, it's interesting that the moments turn on the most insignificant events. I happened to be sitting at a desk when the phone rang, and it was a guy who had been my client when I was in advertising, a music promoter guy, you know, who's, you know, one of these guys, and he says, you know, I got the rights to the Four Seasons. Do you want to do a musical? And I said, oh, that's great. I love Vivaldi, you know, and I think you know, Broadway would really benefit from that. And he said, no, not Vivaldi. It's Frankie Valli in the Four Seasons. And I said, why? Why would anybody be interested in that? He starts rattling off song titles. And I said, oh, well, I know those songs from when I was a kid, but I didn't know they were all from the same group. Why didn't I know that they're all from the same group? And he says, well, they were never written about. And that's interesting as a writer to hear the notion of an untold story that might be a good story. And that's how I ended up meeting Bob and Frankie through this guy who then went away. And it's interesting to note that the guy who was responsible for calling me, and God knows I wasn't the first name or the 10th name or the 20th name on his list, but you can imagine if he got all the way down to me, this was how hot the idea of a musical about Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons seemed to the coterie of connigenti that decides everything in the, you know, on Broadway. I say that with some sarcasm because, of course, you never know. There's no, if there was a formula for success, Rodgers and Hammerstein wouldn't have written Allegro, which is a show you've never heard of. Andrew Lloyd Webber wouldn't have written Aspects of Love, another show you've never heard of. You know, Neil Simon wouldn't have written I Ought to Be in Pictures, a play you've never heard of. You know, Arthur Miller wouldn't have written Ride Down Mount Morgan, another play you've never heard of. These are all people who have wonderful, wonderful genius talents whose work we know and will celebrate for 100 years. But they sometimes get it wrong. And you don't know because there's no formula. There's no science to it. There's experience. And then there's this internal gyroscope that you might be lucky enough to have. And the reason why we're here, going all the way back to the real reason why, aside from, you know, God created the earth in, you know, in 7 days, is that this guy here, aside from the fact that he's blessed with the ability to write a hooky song, which is not nothing.
Hooky, you said, not hokey.
No, hooky.
Hooky.
You know, he had, you know, he sort of breezes over the idea that at 15 he kind of knew that school he could come back to in favor of an education that only a handful of people would be lucky enough to get, like going out on the road with Sam Cooke and Jackie Wilson and the Everly Brothers, going below the Mason-Dixon line as the only white guy on a bus and figuring out what that was like in 1956, 1957, 1958, when the world was really different from the way it is now. How that altered him, how that formed him as an artist and as a man, as a guy who could then have an ongoing composer-lyricist relationship with a guy who's gay. And you know, guys from New Jersey aren't supposed to know guys who are gay, and it didn't matter because of something that he had inside of himself that gave him a way of thinking. Hearing Frankie Valli's voice and saying, I want to write for that voice, which was the, you know, the moment of spontaneous combustion, because with Bob's songwriting skills and no Frankie's voice, you have something. Frankie had his voice before Bob Gaudio came along, and he had something. Put them together, and suddenly, you know, the whole world explodes. And that's somehow part of what we're, you know, why we're all here today in this room. It's listening to that thing that tells you, I'm not sure why, but I feel like I have to do this. Knowing that there's no guarantee, knowing that you're never going to hit the bullseye every time. But hearing, you know, your principles of inclusion and exclusion are formed by that voice, that internal gyroscope, I like to call it, because Bob really has got one. And that's why, as an artist, he was also able to think as an entrepreneur and say, I think our story is worth being told.
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
Well, essentially, I think it comes back down to the instinct. You know, you can be fed as much information, you can look at as much history, you can learn as much, you can watch. I certainly did. I said this morning, I went away on a bus. I left high school, was 15 years old. I came back 6 months later and I was 35. So I did learn a lot. What would have happened had I stayed in school? I don't know. Maybe the same thing, maybe not. But you know, you grab the chance, the moment, and instinctively you're going to have to you get to that crossroad, and maybe both roads are sensible, but you're going to have to pick one. And you just hope that that internal gyroscope, as Rick calls it, leads you in the right direction. And there's, you know, I'll tell you a very, very quick story about focus. Focus on what you're looking to accomplish. If you know early enough. Fortunately, I was 15 and I had focus. I knew what I wanted, and I didn't. It's not that I didn't think anything would stand in my way, because God knows lots of things did, but you just feel like you're doing the right thing. Leaving school was the right thing for me. My principal, if it wasn't for him, I mean, God bless him, because I don't know where I'd be if he kept me in school. But you know, there was an opportunity. I didn't leave to just hang out. I left because I had a hit record. I left because it was an exciting tour to go and out on the road with Jackie Wilson and Sam Cooke and Bo Diddley and Laverne Baker, and my God, it was, you know, a dream come true. So I had a good reason to leave, and it was the beginning for me, but it was about the focus and staying with it. Fortunately for me, it happened quickly, so everyone should be that fortunate. A guy who I grew up with and played in a jazz quartet, didn't happen so quickly for him, but he had as much or more notoriety in the acting field. And he didn't make it until he was 42. And that guy's name is Joe Pesci. I could tell you a little more of a thrilling story on how it happened, but getting to the point, because we have lots to cover, I ran into him in a studio. He was, I hadn't seen him in 20 years. He embraced, we talked, hey, what are you doing? I'm doing The Jazz Singer, I got Neil Diamond, I'm doing a film here. And he said, oh, so am I. I said, yeah, what are you doing? He said, well, it was a little first big acting job at a little film, low budget. I said, really? He said, yeah, a couple of good actors, one in particular, a great director. I said, what's the name of it? He said, well, I'll tell you who's directing. It's Martin Scorsese, it's Robert De Niro, and it's called Raging Bull. Now, the point here is, he didn't make it until he was 42. So here's a kid that's 15, who's all his dreams come true. Here's a guy who wins an Academy Award first time out of the box. He's 42. So it's the focus, it's the desire, it's knowing what you want to accomplish. And, you know, dreams come true. It just depends on how long you're willing to wait for them.
I think this is a perfect opportunity to thank you both once again for...
Is that it? Are we done?
No, I'm just...
Went by so fast.
I'm paying homage for introducing it to us as your producer. We will be eternally grateful. And in the theater world, a producer is essentially the owner of a small business, and the business is the theatrical property, the show. And we are responsible for hiring, making the contracts with all the creative personnel, booking a theater, casting the show, and then doing all the marketing, which as the show goes on becomes increasingly important. And I think at this juncture, my company Dodger had two good ideas, you know, two actions that we took. We introduced a director into the mix, a guy named Des McAnuff, who then had a, you know, very significant role in helping everybody shape the evening. And we plotted the development of the show through a not-for-profit regional theater, the La Jolla Playhouse. Just like the Playmakers Rep here on your campus, the La Jolla Playhouse is on the campus of University of California at San Diego. And in that way, for, you know, 10 cents on the dollar, you can find out what you've got before it's ready to come to New York. And it turned out to be the most successful show in the history of the La Jolla Playhouse. It extended 2 or 3 times and really set us up for the Broadway transfer, even though that was not a given and not an easy process. One attitude we encountered in making the show was a dismissive term called the jukebox musical, which I think is kind of lazy journalism, but people kept applying to our show. And I wonder how both of you contended with that description, and, you know, what actions you took to counter that impression.
Well, Rick's going to articulate this because he's got Yale.
No, you know,
and he's got history. But let me just say one other.
Go, Bob.
No, well, all I wanted to say was we all knew that was facing us, and from my viewpoint, there's nothing better than being the underdog in New York. There's that rooting for the guy on the bottom that is very prevalent on the East Coast. It may be everywhere, but I'd prefer being in that position, and we certainly were in that position. So, but having said that, you're going to tell them why they're wrong.
I think you're jumping the gun a little bit. When we were making the show, because the director, Des McAnuff, that Ed just mentioned, isn't just a director. He, at the time, was the artistic director of this theater in La Jolla, Southern California, the La Jolla Playhouse, and had been for many, many years. And the artistic director functions like the producer down there. So he said, not only do I want to direct this show, but I'll give you this slot. This was November. He said, I can give you a slot in August if you guys can have the show written in time. And so we did the show, and we went into rehearsal in August because he was able to create that opportunity for us. But it was in Southern California. And we all went out to Southern California to work on the play and to be there for rehearsals. And, you know, writing is so much a function of rewriting. You need to be in rehearsals in order to constantly be at work. Well, because we were in Southern California, we were kind of oblivious to the whole jukebox thing, because it wasn't anything that we thought about. We were writing a play about 4 guys who created something. Because they created songs, it has this great soundtrack. Because they created a group, it has this universal theme that audiences seem to identify with, because we've all been members of some kind of group or other. That's what we were thinking about in La Jolla. We were thinking about writing a good story with compelling characters. We weren't thinking about what people were going to call it, how it was going to be classified. So then we do the show, and people seemed to like it, and we thought it would help propel us to New York. And then we became impatient, as creative people tend to do sometimes, when you feel like you've maybe caught a tiger by the tail, and you say, well, why the hell aren't we going to New York? Like now, come on, we're closing on Saturday, let's go to New York on Monday. No, we don't have a theater and we have to raise the money, and there are all these other things that we need to consider, like, for example, it being January when we closed, that January, February, March, April, 3 things happened on Broadway. One was called Good Vibrations, which was a show with the Beach Boys songs in it that wasn't well received. One was called Lennon, which was a biography of John Lennon, but without any Beatles songs. You figure it out. Needless to say, that was not successful. But you know, interesting as a sidebar that somebody thought it was a good idea, including Yoko, who was the consultant on that thing. They're obviously not stupid people. Nobody's trying to do bad work. And so that seemed like a good idea, even though it sounds silly when you say it, a John Lennon show without the Beatles songs. But at the time, somebody thought, with their internal gyroscope, that I've got to do. Anyway, and a third one called All Shook Up, which was the Elvis catalog. 3 catalog shows, now called jukebox musicals by the press, as though you were saying 3 musicals that would give you leprosy if you went to see them. That's how pejorative it was. The press is always looking to tear down things that they deem too easy, right? So Steve Jobs leaves Apple at one point because he's not getting the respect he wants from the company because his product isn't being reviewed well. Years later comes back and is hailed as the Wizard of Oz. What changes? To start with, the genius, but secondarily, how that is perceived, how it's criticized in the press, and the effect the criticism has on that creative talent, the vision, the ability to be free and easy and open and creative, all of those things. The press impacts that. You read something shitty about yourselves in the newspaper, and you know that a million other people are reading it too. You feel a little radioactive. That's just the way it goes. You read something great, well, you're inclined to believe that because it's great. But part of you has to believe the bad stuff too because you know you've believed the good stuff. And everything sort of damages you or forms you or molds you or gives you a tumor or whatever it is. And you keep plowing through that. So there was this spring where suddenly our beautiful little, biography musical was suddenly thought of as another in this line of failed, expensive Broadway flops. So of course, money starts dropping out, can't get a theater, and ultimately we got a theater not by talking about the show, not by talking about the way it makes audiences feel. Nobody cared about that. Nobody being there's 3 people who get to decide your life because there's only 3 landlords. So you suck up to this one and this one says, well, my wife didn't like it. You suck up to this one, well, my business partner doesn't like jukebox musicals. And now you go to this third one and you give up trying to describe the show and you just bring the spreadsheet of what happened at the box office in Southern California. Because they were coming off of a bad season, so their subscription base had gone down to almost nothing. There's a show nobody's ever heard of, a title nobody's ever said out loud, 4 people playing the lead characters that aren't stars. It's Beach Boys territory. It's not where people buy a lot of Four Seasons records. And so you start essentially at 0 with nothing but inventory. There's a lot of supply and 0 demand, and they have no money to advertise. The only advertisement is the show itself. And you start playing on a Tuesday, and by Friday, they're wrapping $75,000 a day with a $30 average ticket price in a 500-seat theater. That's a big, big number. Boom, like a rocket, this graph goes up on the spreadsheet. And there's no advertising, it's just word of mouth, which of course is advertising. And even better, it's free advertising. Pretty soon, they have no inventory left. Then they extend. They announce the extension. That inventory goes. And this spreadsheet was something that even the die-hardest anti-jukebox person could look at and go, well, wait a minute, this is at least an eyebrow raiser. And that's how we got in the door with the theater. It wasn't because of anybody's love for Frankie Valli. It wasn't because anybody liked me or Gaudio or Ed. It wasn't because anybody had vision. It was simply they thought they could make a killing booking a hard-to-book theater up in Siberia on 52nd Street that nobody wanted with a show that might stand a chance of drawing an audience for a short period of time. It was strictly a business, pure and simple business motivation on their part that gave us the opportunity to do this show. And that it turned out to hit was, I'm sure, as big a surprise to them as it was
Rick,
to us.
very diplomatic in not mentioning that one of those catalog shows that crashed and burned, the Beach Boy show, was our show. So in the spring of his discontent, his producer was also essentially bankrupt. So that slowed us down a little bit. And I recall at that moment where we were kind of on the canvas, Rick, with his background in marketing, and my business partner, Michael David, insisted that we spend the $50,000 or $75,000 to film B-roll, which is essentially you go in the theater and form.
Well, it's the stuff that you saw in the video.
Right, some of that is the B-roll, so that we would have a marketing tool for the eventual Broadway transfer. And believe me, as entrepreneurs, nothing is more difficult than that $50,000 you don't have. And I just remember feeling terrified about, oh my God, we're going to be in bankruptcy court and it's going to be 50 grand more than we owe. But in the end, it turned out to be one of the real drivers of our success. And also, I'd like to say, when you do see Jersey Boys, you will note what an outstanding book Rick and Marshall crafted, and I'm convinced that aside from the famous songs which everybody loves, the way the book lets you into the story is just absolutely seminal to the success of the show. Another ingredient, and this is a question for Bob, and this didn't seem extraordinary really at the time, but I remember the day you called the Dodger office and said, what if we called it Jersey Boys? And we said, hey, that's kind of a cool title, but in the end, it's become such a wonderful handle for us. And as we will discuss, the male ticket buyer is something that's unusual about Jersey Boys. I mean, men love the show. I mean, hockey game, Jersey Boys, which one do we come to? And I just think there's something very comfortable and brawny about a title like Jersey Boys. And where did that come
Well,
from?
the little backstory with that is Des McAnuff, although he was gung-ho about this and he had the facility to give us a stage, I had a meeting with him in La Jolla before. I don't know if he had officially signed on or not, but we had a 3-hour lunch. And, funny stuff there, he didn't know that Oh What a Night was one of our songs. So it wasn't in the show at the time. But he said, the one thing that I'm not comfortable with is calling the title, one of the songs, Walk Like a Man or whatever it might have been, or even Oh What a Night it evolved into. He said, I'm not comfortable with that. It's just, the story is too strong to just call it a song title. Anyway, so I thought about that on the way back, and I guess this gets into the approach of, taking action, because it was a loose end, it seemed to me. So when I got back, Jersey Boys hit me because there was no one in the story that wasn't from Jersey, so it sort of fell into making sense. But I didn't just call. See, here's the thing. This gets to take it a step further. I remember calling my son over there, sitting right there, Shannon, and saying, I have a title, but I don't want to just pick up the phone. I want to show something that looks like it could be a show. So he's a graphic artist, and he put together, I sent him out on the emails with the name Jersey Boys, and it evolved into the logo that it is now. But he did it and he put it together. So there's an example of sometimes you have to do a little bit more than just come up with a good idea. It's what Rick was saying before. Yeah, the title seemed to work, but I didn't feel that just rattling off the title to someone was enough. They had to see something visual to say, hey, yeah, this is a good title. So, it takes more. It takes that extra step. It's a little bit of second guessing. It's playing chess instead of checkers. You try and be 3, 4, 5 moves ahead of the opposition. If it's a theater owner or a producer, whatever it is, you try and stay on top of it. It's like have the answer before you ask the question. So that helps to think through these things, and just having a great title, even a great business idea, is not necessarily going to be enough, because there's lots of you guys here sitting here that have an idea a minute, I'm sure. but it's getting to the finish line, and how do you get there? So,
yeah.
Once again, though, we start off with there's no better place to be an underdog than in New York. So, or we end with it. So,
Rick, did the handle Jersey Boys help you in the writing of the piece, or when you got to La Jolla, did it come together pretty quickly once you were in rehearsal?
With regards to the title, you know, when I was a creative director at an agency, I like to be the guy. You know, we all do, right? You like to be the one who has the big idea. Well, first of all, you like to be the person who understands the difference between activities and ideas. And if you understand that difference, you're probably here in this room, right? And and you like, because of your own vanity, you like to be the captain of the team. You know, like, oh, I'll come up with the big idea and everyone will respond to it. And then there's that moment where somebody else comes up with the idea and you think, oh crap, I wish I'd thought of that. You know, and you instantly know how good it is by how instantly jealous you are that it's not your idea. And the first time I heard Jersey Boys, it really pissed me off that I hadn't thought of it. Because like with some other...
new information here.
No,
How it can be told.
I've told people, just not you, Bob. But you know, there's in the theater or in film, you know, there's you know, Citizen Kane. Yes, it's about this guy, Charles Foster Kane, but it's a metaphor, right, for a larger group of people, the American people. Cabaret. It's about this Kit Kat club in Berlin, but it's also about an environment that could foster Nazism. A chorus line. It's about Broadway dancers, but that's not why it runs 15 years. It runs 15 years because we all know what it's like to put ourselves on a line and say, I really need this job. Sometimes a title that seems very, very narrowly representative can also mean something really, really larger. And in that sense, what happened was Jersey Boys clicked as, well, it's about these four guys from Jersey, obviously, but in this kind of muscular way that we were trying to represent a particular type of American who's not generally celebrated in the fancy, artsy-fartsy world of Broadway theater, like blue-collar, first-generation, Italian-American, Roman Catholic, uneducated guys that most people that the authors knew would have written off as goombas. And yet they have a story that's worth telling, and it's worth telling to the elitists who look down their nose at it because they represent a very large swath of marginalized, disenfranchised people in this country who went through a period of, you know, where there was political upheaval and people were choosing up sides, very much like right now. And I'm talking about at the end of the 60s when there was a group of people who wanted this and there was a group of people who wanted this, and they hated each other a lot. Very polarizing. And the guys who went off to Vietnam rather than protest the war in Washington, D.C., those guys came back having fought and were very disrespected by this culture, our culture, me and my friends. And this show and the men who come to it are connected in a way that's very edifying for that swath of audience member, American male. And it's nothing that we thought of. We weren't that smart. We never focused on them. We never wrote for them. We just tried to tell a good story. But luckily, we connected with an audience that's been large enough to sustain this business for 7 years, yeah. all over the place.
Right. And in the playbill, there's a credit for the ones that got away, other notable songs by the Four Seasons that are not included in Jersey Boys. How agonizing was that, and how did you manage that with Bob and Frankie?
Well, I did battle with Des. I guess Rick knows most of it, lobbying to get one of my favorite songs as a songwriter, which is The Sun Ain't Gonna Shine Anymore, in the show. And, at some point, you do have to look at the bigger picture, and he said he tried, and you probably know more about it.
We wrote
it in.
We wrote it in. But because we started with we didn't start with a song list. Mamma Mia, which is a hugely successful example of a jukebox musical, The people who made that show said they started with the song list. Here are the songs that we really, really want. Now let's retrofit a story that can accommodate these songs. But they were making up a story. Not really. There's actually a play you should look at called, you know, Dear Charles, which is actually the story of Mamma Mia, but no one's supposed to know that. From sort of boulevard comedy. They started with the song list and retrofitted the story. Marshall and I were attracted by their story, and we started to write a play. And the play, along the road of the play come these landmarks, which happen to be the songs that they're doing. And so the songs sort of nominated themselves in most cases. But when Bob and or Frankie would say, well, what about this one? We would give it the old college try to figure out a way, but invariably it felt shoehorned because the show was kind of making itself in a pretty organic way. And the director had very specific requirements of us as writers and of the songs, which had already been written, and how they would function in the show. So the song that Bob mentions actually is in the show, but only as underscore in a particular scene. That's true of a couple of songs that otherwise would have ended up on the list of the ones that we got away. Anyway, as a sop to Bob and as a nod to the fans of all the songs that aren't represented in the show, and there are 33 songs in the show, but you can't have 53 songs in the show because the show can only be so long. There's a list, the ones that got away.
And Bob, I think Frankie and you waited a few days before you saw the show in La Jolla. Were you apprehensive about what it was going to be, and
well,
what was your reaction?
Yeah, I will admit to sneaking in. So I did see some previews, and Frankie did come in cold. We sat together, and you know, it was tough because I know the content and I knew what was coming, and I knew at that time the death of his daughter was even more breathtaking. And so it was a tough time for me. It was a tough time because I'm sitting next to him and I know what's coming. Yeah. And he didn't. So it was a lot of tearful moments, a lot of, I hope we both can get up, you know, and I get a little emotional talking about it, but he got through it, you know, and that's why Frankie, at the end of this show, you have to, whether you love the music, you hate the voice, you love the voice, whatever, you marvel at the man, you marvel at what he's been through, you say, gee, if it had been my kid, I would have been a basket case, you know, and I can honestly say that. So to do that, still make music, come back maybe as big or bigger than ever after that, is the story. I think the story that you know, attracted Marshall and Rick to do what they did, and they did it so brilliantly, and it was so inspired. And I will say that Frankie and I both made a pact that we would not interfere, because if it turned out to be our view of who we are, it would have been a whitewash. And as we've said many times, you know, the show is kind of warts and all. I hate that expression, but I can't find a better one. And it's true, but you gotta let go. There's sometimes you just have to say, they can do this, and you trust it.
Well, it's also the theory of plausible deniability, right? If they're not around and it sucks, they can say, well, hey, we weren't there to make sure that it was good.
I didn't think about that, but that's it. That was good. That would have been good, and I would have used it.
We thought about it. It's just a really good lesson, something else that we couldn't have planned for, because if Bob and Frankie wanted to come see it in rehearsal, we obviously couldn't have said, no, you can't come. But they weren't available for a different set of reasons to come to see the play in rehearsal. And they only saw it, for the first time Bob saw it, the first time Bob saw it with Frankie, it was in the middle of an audience at twice the size of the number of people in this room. And had they seen it in a room where it was just the actors doing it for them, judging it without the energy of being surrounded by people who were really digging it, their reaction to it might have been very, very different. They were swept up in it the way that the audience was as part of an audience. And it's probably the single luckiest thing that ever happened to us, because they did have the power of no. which is, you know, a big power to have. So we didn't get a no because the audience was there screaming, collectively screaming yes. And it would have been churlish of them to say no, nitpicky. And then all the nitpicking has come out over the course of the, you know, of the subsequent years. But that first reaction, the initial reaction, the real important reaction, because most of us will only ever see it one time, is their first reaction was just like the reaction of the hundreds of people sitting around them. And that was a really lucky thing for the life of the show.
Let me interject the pure business. It's the pure business structure that the producer introduced after La Jolla.
There you go.
Thank you. We formed a limited partnership with a capitalization of $8 million, comprising 60 different investors. And even with the success in La Jolla, it was very difficult raising the money for many of the reasons that Rick and Bob have described. We opened on Broadway in November 2005, and were able to pay back the startup capital and make our first profit distribution by August of 2006. So once you have that Broadway success, then the kind of ancillary stuff starts to happen for you. And the first thing I want to talk about, which actually was coincident with our arriving on Broadway, was the cast recording. And Bob, as a veteran of the record industry, and Rick as the new author, how did you approach the cast recording, and what was it like for you, Rick, in adapting your script to be on a record?
Well, Rick was invaluable once I was in the studio, because the concept of the early years was condensed, the first 10 minutes or so, I think, in the album. But before that, the idea of doing a cast album, which was, I don't know, you tell me, is that normal to do it before the show opens, or do you usually sit it out and see what happens?
Before it opens? No.
Yeah.
Very unusual.
Well, because I have enough contact in the music world, I was able to put the word out that we had a show. It was going to be in La Jolla. Fortunately, a lot of companies out in California, that first come, first serve. If you come see the show and you like it, we'll talk about the possibility of a cast album, but it would have to be pre the show opening. You can't sit around and wait and see how good the show is. You can see it, you know, because they obviously came to see it in La Jolla. So Warner Brothers picked it up right away. And it was important to just, for me, and I know you guys know the same thing, because like you say, it wasn't the way to go, to show the potential, what we believe to be strength of the show. Now, of course, you know, I had inside information because I'm in La Jolla, and I just saw what Rick described before. So I didn't feel uncomfortable putting a record company in a position that they can't have a chit here. They're going to have to call it in now, and we're going to make the album before we open. Right. But the best part of that, apart from showing of support, was that the cast, which is, I think, unusual, and it happens for us all the time now, the cast members had a chance to hear what they would sound like in that theater. Now, that's a big deal, because I think most actors actor-singers don't ever get a chance to sit in the audience and hear what's being projected. Feel the excitement that when he sings Can't Take My Eyes Off You, or whatever song, what's really happening in the audience. So when they hear their vocal quality, and I've always said to them, the microphone's your friend. This is not a theater. The microphone's your friend. You can warm up to it. You don't have to reach the back of the theater. So the way you did it on the cast album is the way you have to do it in the theater. And they're gonna get it. We have the best people in the world in the sound department. They're going to reach them. The nuances that you would get on a recording, you can have in the theater. So they heard it. See, I could say that all day long to singers, but until they hear it played back and say, oh yeah, now I know why I didn't have to really blast that one. That was invaluable. So, and that's sort of been our role, our business model, or mine, with all the other Frankies. They go into the studio with me. They work with our team. And then the end of it is into the studio, sing on the tracks, and hear what you're going to sound like when those lights go on. Because chances are you're going to forget everything I told you. But if you have this Bible of how you sound, that's your goal, to reach that place every time you go on that stage. So
and with regard to the excerpts of the dialogue and scenes that are on the record, there was a real mixed reaction to that concept. Among them, Ed's partner, Michael David, was dead set against it. And it was interesting because Broadway cast albums only very rarely have a little snippet here and there, and mostly because it's harder to recreate or to create a new arrangement under the time frame that these cast albums have to be done. So if some dialogue exists in the middle of a song, you leave that in so that you don't have to create a new version of the song just for the recording, for efficiency's sake. And the creative choice doesn't really come into play. Here we wanted to have substantial justification for having bits and pieces of scenes where you really got to have a sense of the flavor, the sound, the language, the texture, and the story of the show. And the reason that we fought for it, and the reason that it turned out to be great for the album to have this stuff, is a reaction to this whole jukebox musical thing. You know, people could easily have thought that this was a tribute show with 4 guys knocking off the Four Seasons, a sound-alike thing. You know, they happen all over the world, and without any story at all. And you know, I'm a theater guy, and I love story, and I also know that story is, you know, the thing that makes you love the theater. So we wanted to, in terms of a marketing effort, express very strongly and frontally and in a headliney way always that this was a show with a great story, because the songs obviously people know. 175 million of them do anyway, because that's how many records Bob sold. So they know the songs. What they don't know is that there's a great story attached to these songs. And so every chance we got to say story or imply story was in our favor. And this was a great way to not imply it, but to actually demonstrate it. For the cost of an album, you were going to get much more than what you usually get from an album, which is just the playlist. Here you're going to get scenes. And it does make it an unusual record, but you know, equally unusually, it's one of a handful of records that's gone of original cast recordings. I guess you can't call them records anymore. Original cast recordings that's gone double platinum. Guess the top-selling ever Broadway cast recording, and you get a special prize. Any takers? Good guess, but wrong. Phantom of the Opera was ventured. Also a good guess, but wrong. Phantom of the Opera is number 3. Lion King is number 5.
Well, he knows his stuff.
You're thinking too recently, see, because remember that pop music and Broadway music used to be the same thing until about 1964, and people bought a lot of records before 1964. It's My Fair Lady. Believe it or not, My Fair Lady, a title we're pretty familiar with. And here's one of the reasons why it sold so many records. The single general partner with the producer, Herman Levin, was Columbia Records. And so Columbia Records had put all the money into the show so that they could make the cast album. And they made the cast album, and of course it was on Julie Andrews, the very same Julie Andrews who presented us with the Tony. How cool is that? You know, was on the Ed Sullivan Show, and Rex Harrison was on the thing, and then they made the movie, and everybody went out and bought the cast album all over again. And then, you know, so they actually, about, you know, many millions of My Fair Ladies are out there somewhere, all in vinyl.
And part of that merchandising, that happened to be an inside thing with the Columbia Records and all of that. But in our case, with the dialogue, I've had many people who have seen the show that came to see the show, which is usually the reverse, because they heard the cast album. They bought the cast album in Omaha and heard the dialogue. It sucked them into the story. Hey, this is not just a remake of the original masters. So I think that was important. So it became a promotional tool, as Rick said, but even beyond what we thought. You know, it was a good place to put it.
I was trying to be circumspect by not saying that, of course, by not having it just be the straight-up songs, it was a reasonable thing for somebody else to buy, even if you had all the Four Seasons records. If it was just the same songs, well, I already have those. Why should I spend 20 bucks on something I already have? So this had something else. This was something else to buy in that wonderful old Ogilvy Mather story about Johnny Walker. I'll do this as a quick little sidebar. It's a great marketing story for an entrepreneurial class. Mr. Johnny Walker, whoever he is, it's the end of World War II, and he wants to sell more scotch. And he goes to his advertising agency, Ogilvy Mather, and he says, I want to sell more scotch. And if you can't give me a new ad campaign, because it's always the problem, it's always the ad agency's fault if you can't sell more of your product, I'm going to put your account in review, and I'm going to go and I'll audition some other ad agencies. And the guy says, wait a minute, give me the weekend, let me have an idea. Guy comes in on the Monday, and he says, okay, here's the idea. Here, you have your Johnny Walker, here's your packaging. It's got the label and the guy walking, and here's something else. And he takes another bottle and puts it on the table, and it's a black label with the same guy walking on it, and it says, aged 12 years. And he says, Mr. Johnny Walker says, what are you doing? He said, well, this scotch is aged 12 years, so we're going to charge $5 more for this premium product. And Mr. Johnny Walker says, well, but the scotch in the red bottle is aged 12 years. And the ad guy said, but it doesn't say that it's aged 12 years. This is going to say it's aged 12 years. It's still true. We're going to charge $5 more for the black label because that's the premium brand. And he said, I don't understand. And he said, you're going to have two things to sell now instead of one thing. So you'll sell more product. And
with the same product?
There are a lot of examples of that have happened since then. You're sitting in front of them right now, many of you. It's a good idea to have more than one thing to sell.
This is a very wide-ranging entrepreneurial class. I think we've come to the point in the afternoon where we might take some questions from those laptops up there. So you ready for the magic whiteboard? I'll walk over here so I can...
you can read them?
I can read them
Good.
to lob them back.
What if,
anybody?
What if there's
no one
there?
There's nothing polite. When are these clowns going to go?
Okay, well, does anyone want to do it the old-fashioned way? Just raise your hand and shout out something. Right here?
How do you think it would do internationally, or do you want to try to take it abroad?
That's a good question. We have a company in London. We have a company in Australia. And right now in Johannesburg, South Africa, there's a company rehearsing that will play in Singapore. So we are, and the two international companies so far have been extremely successful, and we have high hopes for our Far East version as well. So this wonderful collaboration seems to have international appeal. But thank you. Yes?
I was wondering if Bob, the songwriter, you're still writing songs and what you're working on as a playwright. What are you working on?
I am not writing songs as I know them. I am working on a musical version of Peggy Sue Got Married, the movie. It has played in London. We're bringing it back with revisions, et cetera, et cetera. So since I've been bitten by the Broadway bug, a bigger scope of music is much more appealing.
I wrote Jersey Boys with Marshall Brickman. He's an Academy Award-winning screenwriter. You know, he's a great, great writer. And I wrote a show with him that we did at the Goodman Theater in 2008. And then we worked on this thing called the Addams Family, which was sort of a terrible failure. And we were really vilified for it as writers. It's interesting because Jersey Boys was the first musical either of us had ever written about or thought about writing about. And it was a big, big success. And the Addams Family was the opposite and the opposite of that. You know, kind of, both of them were really world-changing for us in our own little ego heads. But it was only as a solo writer last year with this play, Peter and the Starcatcher, which is adapted from a novel by Dave Barry and Ridley Pearson, that Disney they were sort of painted into a corner and had to hire me to write it. Otherwise, they never would have hired me, because they hire big marquee writers. And it's only with that solo credit and the fact that the play was, was well received, have I now, fielding offers, as I think the expression goes. Like suddenly I've got a lot to do, and I like writing for the theater because I love the theater. Also, Hollywood couldn't care less about me, and that's just fine.
You're too modest, Rick.
But it's fascinating when you de-associate yourself from somebody, how the perception of you changes. I can't explain it, but I can identify it for you.
So we have some questions from the audience. I saw Jersey Boys in Las Vegas this summer and absolutely loved it. Are there any plans for a movie? A loaded question, I might add.
Yeah, there is a movie in the works at this point, and knowing the music world and now finding out about the film world, all things subject to change. But Jon Favreau, who some of you may know, is directing, and we're moving forward very quickly now. So I hesitate to say a whole lot more about it than that, because as I say, it's a moving target. But we'll be there. I just don't know exactly how quickly.
Rick, do you want to?
I think coming soon to a theater near you is the expression.
There you go.
Vague enough.
Not much confidence in the Hollywood process.
Well, it's easier to control musicians in a studio than the bigwigs.
This show, the songs for the show were written by Bob and Bob Crew and some other people, but years and years and years ago. When it comes right down to it, this show was written by two guys in a room who hadn't been paid $1. They were just doing it.
That's no longer the case, by the way.
So now, then suddenly something happens, success. Now, you've heard the expression, success has many authors. Well, when a Broadway show ends up becoming a hit, and it's so unlikely, the odds are so against it, they say it's easier to win a trifecta at the track than it is to have a Broadway show that pays back. So when a show becomes a hit, a lot of people pay attention. A lot of those people come from Hollywood. And in Hollywood, there's no such thing as two guys working in a room alone. There's 70 guys standing over the shoulder of those people saying, yeah, well, but what if it wasn't Jersey Boys? What if it was Carolina Girls? Wouldn't that be better? Why, maybe we, and really, stuff as silly as that, and sometimes some brilliant suggestions, but stuff as silly as that. Does it have to be Boys? Does it have to be Frankie Valli? Does it have to be like the show? Does it have to be, should it have big movie stars in it? Maybe Tom Hanks should play Frankie Valli. You get all this input that's not helpful. And then, of course, there's the people who run the studios who want to have, for their money, a sense of control. And the minute you try to, open that up, that process up, things start to change, and the impulse to do it is altered.
Also, apart from the creative issues, it's time consuming. What normally should take 6 months to bring from point A to point B could take 2 years. So the reason I'm sort of hesitant, I think Rick's quite right, coming to a theater nearest you soon is about all we can really say about it. It just gets too complicated.
We have some other good questions here. How did it feel to win the Tony Award for Jersey Boys? I know when I see Julie Andrews say that, I still want to jump out of my chair. So
yeah,
never gets old.
Well, Rick has, for me, when you hear from people around you, family, some industry people, that you're going to win it, that's when you stop. Light flashes. I really don't want to hear that. So we didn't go in, I certainly didn't go in with any expectations of seeing us come out of there with a Tony, no less 4. And I think the moment was Julie Andrews saying, and the winner is, Yeah.
Well, yeah, you got to watch her up there in the video. For me personally, it was a thrill. Ed told you, you know, he mentioned that I saw my first Broadway show when I was 3, and it was My Fair Lady with Julie Andrews. And so it was especially poignant for me to run up and maul her, and then like an idiot I said, "Oh my God, I saw you when I was 3," and she looked at me like, "Thanks a lot."
It was a stop time moment for sure.
We have time for one more, and this is actually a very interesting question. How can a Broadway play be innovative in the 21st century? And you know, I would start by saying, I hope you all will see it if you haven't already, and there are several of the staging techniques which make the effect very present in a way really that you know, electronic technology can't do. And I mean, to me, that's the start of a good answer to that. But how do you feel about the, you know, the innovative qualities of? We were
talking last night about the renaissance of vinyl and long-playing records and phonographs in people your age. And I think that what's truly innovative, the theater's really, really old. You know, there's many, many centuries of storytelling, going all the way back to the caves and the cave dwellers. And we like to do it. We're hardwired to listen to other people tell us stories. And it seems that what's innovative is not the technology of theater, which is always competing to be like cinema and always failing, but to going back to the very early real primal reasons why we like it, which is simple, compelling stories with great characters, and it can be told with nothing. And more, what I'm seeing as an avid theater goer are plays that get rid of automation, hydraulics, computer activated, this and that, you know, things flying in, helicopter chandeliers, all that stuff. That's the 20th century. For the 21st century, it's people bring on their own chairs and sit down and talk to somebody else. And what you get is a more human scale thing. As our greater lives fly more and more out of control and we feel less and less human, what's humanizing is going to the theater and seeing people on our same scale on a stage, looking at each other, making contact with each other, connecting with us across the footlights. That's probably the most innovative thing, even though it's also the oldest thing.
All right. Well, I don't think we could have ended in a better place than that. Let's hear it for Ed Strong, Bob Gaudio, Rick Elice.